Hello, everybody. Welcome to episode 1 of Just Us, brand new podcast with just us,
Hey.
just Sarah and I. I don't even know where to even start, other than the premise of this podcast of really what we had in mind is that we would have an opportunity just to kind of talk about life and about topics that maybe people want to hear more about and kind of where we're at in life. And so that's why we decided to do this podcast. And so here we are. Started as an idea, and then now it's a full-blown podcast. So what do you have to say about that, Sarah?
Yeah, I think our hope with this podcast of sitting down, just the two of us, is so that people can get to know us a little bit more. And also, I think my hope is that they will receive some practical things that we've learned along our journey, personally, together, raising a family, in ministry, that will help them also in their journey with the Lord, in their relationship, and wherever life finds them right now.
Yeah.
So.
Well, the purpose I was hoping for this podcast, very similar, but also I love people. I love hearing people's stories. I love being around people.
Yeah.
And I wanted to create something where it was almost like if we could have coffee with people, if we could sit down in their living room, and some we get to do that. There's a lot of people we get to have coffee with, and we get to meet with, and we get to know them on a more personal level. But there's a lot of people who we don't have that opportunity to. Right. And so we were hoping that this podcast would be a great way to sit down and have coffee with one another, to hang out, to learn and to listen. And you get to hear our stories. So many times I forget that people don't even know who we are, how we met,
right.
How we found the Lord, our testimonies, and kids and family and ministry. And so I'm hoping that this would be just an opportunity to do
Sit
that.
down and have coffee with
sit down
them.
and have coffee. And I'm always down for a good cup of coffee. Always. Coffee and conversation are like two of my favorite
I can only
things.
handle 1 cup, so I've already had mine today.
Lightweight. No joke. I could drink coffee. Well, you tell them. I could pretty much
You could drink coffee all day.
I do drink coffee all day.
You do, yeah.
Water and coffee all day long, but coffee with no creamer.
Yes.
I start that way.
Yes.
Creamer towards the end of the day, maybe 1 cup with cream and sugar.
Right.
That's like dessert. But I always start the day and drink, majority of the day is black coffee. I love it.
Yeah.
Nothing better.
Yeah.
So,
I'll have
but
heart
not
palpitations all day long. I can't do it.
I don't get those.
Okay.
I don't understand why.
All right. Well.
Yep. Anyway, so there's the first thing you know about us. I like drinking coffee all day. Sarah only has 1 or 2 cups.
Yes.
Now, you will drink one in the afternoon.
Sometimes.
Yes.
Not every day, but sometimes.
Yes.
I do like tea, too.
Yes.
But only really during the cold months of the
I
year.
hate tea.
I know you hate tea.
I hate tea. I don't even, what's the point of tea? I don't know. Coffee all the way.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Anyway.
So, we thought a great place to start today would just to kind of jump into our stories a little bit more.
Right.
Of kind of our testimony, maybe a little bit about how our journey thus far.
Yep.
And so I don't know who wants to start that. Do you want me to start?
I'll let you start.
Okay, I can start.
If I have any questions along the way, I will ask you questions.
Well, I'm sure you will have a lot of questions along the way.
Okay. Or maybe I just want you to clarify something.
Probably,
so I will
because you
jump
know
in
how I am. Yep.
You forgot that part.
Wow. Yeah, I did. I did. Okay. Well, I'll start with kind of my story.
Yeah.
My name is Mark Bunting.
I'm sure the
Born
people
in 1980.
don't know.
No, I'm not going to tell you my middle name because often when I say my middle name, people laugh at me. So now I will tell you my middle name, Orlando.
You should tell
I love
everyone.
my middle name, Orlando. Other people laugh at me, but I love Orlando.
Yeah.
It's a family name passed down to me from my grandfather. My grandfather's first name was Orlando. And I love that middle name just because of what he represents. He was a World War II vet, drafted at 19 years old, the son of a farmer in Sussex County, Delaware, in Frankfort, Delaware, goes and fights on the front lines of World War II, Battle of the Bulge, Battle of Rhineland, Bronze Star winner. I mean, he's just was an amazing man. So once I knew the story of my grandfather, I don't mind Orlando, and I've passed it down to my oldest son, Orlando.
Yes.
And so, anyway,
Take pride in sharing your
I
middle
should.
name.
I should.
Yes.
I should. So this year, in September, in the fall, I turned 45 years old, and it's been an amazing journey. I started with all dark hair, and look at me now, baby. It's all gray almost.
It was a lot. It was a lot curlier too back when I met you.
It was a lot curlier and a lot longer. Maybe I should go for that look again. No, I won't.
No.
So some of you kind of already know a little bit about my story, that I am a pastor's son. My dad was the pastor here at Emmanuel for over 30 years. So my story starts kind of with my parents who were in the ministry.
Yeah.
And, I often say that I'm a pew baby, and meaning not that my diaper was full and pew, but I was passed from pew to pew. So I was raised in church, unlike my parents. My parents weren't raised in church, and so they had a radical conversion. God saved them in an amazing way, restored their marriage, and God began to use them, and they felt called to ministry. So when they felt that call to ministry, they sold everything they had. My dad was a farmer. My mom's a beautician.
And tell them how many siblings you have and
I
where
have
you
4.
fall.
I am the baby
You are
of
the
4.
baby. Yeah.
I am the baby. And I've often said that when you've seen one Bunning in our family, you've seen us all, because I'm very similar to my brothers. Matter of fact, there's one brother in particular I look a lot like.
Yeah.
And people have stopped him in the community. He's not in ministry. And people have stopped him in the community and were like, hey, man, great message on Sunday, which is so funny. And there are times he used to be like, I'm not Mark. No, that's my brother. Now he just says, hey, thanks, appreciate that, which I think is hilarious. Because we look so much similar, but I am the youngest of 4 siblings. I have 2 older brothers and an older sister. And so most of my memories growing up were in ministry, were in church. For my older siblings, they kind of knew, particularly my 2 older brothers, they knew my parents more. They were there during the times of their conversion, when they got saved, when they accepted Christ, and so they kind of knew them in the farmer stage and the beautician stage, and have seen that progression where they sold everything and moved to go into ministry.
Right.
From my vantage point, I never really knew that. I was a baby when all that happened. So my parents, when they gave their lives to Christ, radical conversion, and realized this is what we want to do with the rest of our life, they sold everything and moved from Frankfurt, Selbyville, Fenwick Island area. That's why I'm probably related to everybody with the last name Bunning in Sussex County,
Sussex
because it's a
County.
large family.
That's right.
But when they said yes, they sold everything and they moved to South Carolina for my dad to go to school, and they gave my parents a church down there in Moncks Corner, South Carolina, tiny little town, and it was in the Francis Marion Swamp, like a state forest was nearby. And the area in which we lived in, they actually called it Hellhole Swamp. That was the name of the town. So they gave my parents a tiny little country church of 6 people, and then we showed up with our 6, my parents and the 2 siblings. And when what's that? And
doubled
then
in attendance.
Doubled in attendance. My dad won an award that year for 100% growth, all because our family showed up. So,
love it.
And I remember hearing stories. My dad would tell me later that they got lost on their way down, and a car had passed them way back in the sticks, man, way back in the forest in the middle of nowhere as they're trying to find it. And a car passed them, turned around. He saw them turn around the rearview mirror, flagged them down. And so when they pulled over, he said, hey, are you the Bunnings trying to find the church? He said, yeah, how did you know that? He said, because nobody with Delaware license tags would ever be out in the middle of nowhere.
That's funny.
So my parents went into ministry. So my earliest memories are kind of between that and also the second church over in Spartanburg, South Carolina. When my dad finished school, he took another church near the Spartanburg area, near Greenville, South Carolina area. And so that's kind of where the memories began for me as a child, growing up in church.
Yeah.
My parents ended up at Emmanuel because this Emmanuel had no pastor for about 6 months, and the pastor had moved on. And long story short, they had heard that there was a pastor that had grown up in the area, was pastoring in South Carolina. They reached out to my father, extended an invitation. And so in 1986, we came up. Of course, I hadn't even turned 6 years old yet. So my parents came up and candidated for the position. The church voted, said yes. And so we moved up here in August of 1986. And that's really where my formative years, my memories of ministry started when we pulled up here. And so my childhood, I had a great childhood at an early age. A lot of people are like, how was it being a pastor's kid? Well, when I was young, I loved it because I ruled these grounds for years, man. Like I ran.
We don't have any kids that are like that.
No, I ran all over this place. I mean, when I was young, when I was probably about maybe 9 years old for Christmas one year, I got a go-kart, like an engine-powered go-kart. And man, I tore these grounds up with that go-kart. It was back in the day when there was no large church that you see now. None of that was here. And so, and then there was no Beagland Park Drive. That was just Shamrock Drive. So there's a lot more places to ride. And man, I would take that go-kart out and I would do donuts and in the grounds, and I'd be all in and out all over the place. So I had a fun childhood in church, and I loved it. It was a great childhood. And as I progressed, I remember about 9 years old or so, 10 years old. I don't think I've ever really shared this story. It had to have been at Easter time because that's usually when Charleston Hetz, what's his name? Charleston, the actor, 10 Commandments. You remember the old 10 Commandments movie?
Yeah.
There was it's an old famous movie. It still comes on at Easter time.
Yeah. You're a little bit older than me, so you can't
get out of
here.
I'm not that much older than you. Get out of here. That I remember watching that movie in the parsonage, which is here on the church grounds where we lived for years. And as I don't know, 8, 9, 10, somewhere in there, I felt this thing in me about ministry. And I remember telling my dad when he was tucking me into bed, I feel called to ministry at an early age.
Wow.
That memory came back to my mind years later. And I remember my dad praying with me and for me.
That's
and
awesome.
Then from that point on, I kind of got off the beaten path a little bit.
Yeah.
You know, I kind of became your typical
PK.
I was not a troublemaker, not by any means. I guess you could say I was spirited.
And probably a class clown is.
I was a class
how
clown. I was always full of life.
Yes.
I loved to make people laugh. I loved to. So even as a young age, I did a lot of that. So, I love to hear stories from my old Sunday school teachers growing up that would say, "Whoa, man, I'm so glad you were a preacher because you were a handful growing up," And I used to love to have fun and so those were my earliest memories on up to about high school, and then got into high school and, got really confused in the high school years of trying to find my way and who I was. And that's where it really...
And why do you say that? What was it?
I don't know. I think we all kind of get to that age in life.
Yeah.
In the high school age where we're trying to decipher, like, who am I? What am I doing? And for me, I kind of reached that point where it was like, it's hard to tell another kid that when they say, "What do your parents do?" And you say, "Well, my dad's a pastor," and they're like, "What? A pastor? What is that?"
Right.
And that it almost is a sense of embarrassment almost back then. Like, I don't know how do I explain this? I don't know how to tell them. And so I remember being in middle school, and there'd be times where my dad would have to drop me off in the church van, and I'd make him park way out in the middle of the street, like not even close to the school, and get out because I was so embarrassed,
Yeah.
And just being that age, you don't...
Trying to figure out
You're
who you
trying
are.
to figure it all out.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of how I was. Now, in the midst of all that, sports for my family we were very into athletics and sports.
Both your parents were very
Both
athletic.
my parents. A lot of people don't know that about my parents, that both my parents, both my mom and my dad, were extremely athletic.
Yeah.
My dad was a great basketball player. So I've seen these videos of him, or not videos, but pictures of him back in the day with these little shorty shorts and the tube socks pulled all the way up, and the Chuck Taylors. That was the like Michael Jordans before Michael Jordans was the Chuck Taylors. So, and he would always tell me, son, if they had the 3-point line back when I was in high school, I'd be lighting it up. I'd be lighting it up. They didn't have it back then. So, and then, of course, he was a 3-star athlete, or a 3-sport athlete with basketball, football, and baseball. And then my mom was
basketball was one
field
of her
hockey,
too,
basketball, and softball. So they were heavily involved in very good athletes. And a lot of my siblings, that's what we did. My sister went more the music route. She didn't do the sports, but my brothers and I, played sports, and I grew up going to my brother's games. They're much older than I am. They're 12 years. My oldest brother's 12 years older than I am. And then my other brother's only about a year or so younger than him. Right. So a lot of my memories growing up were going to their games and watching them play sports. And both played collegiate sports. One played Division I football at Liberty University. Another one played baseball at Salisbury University and Southern Wesleyan, and then back to Salisbury. So a lot of these memories, I used to love to imitate them and emulate them. I used to love doing that. So I grew up as an early age of athletics and sports is what we did. And so that became my identity as I approached high school. But then towards the end of high school, there was a restlessness inside of me, really because, I wasn't a bad kid. I wasn't I wasn't a hell raiser. But at the same time, I was sowing my wild oats a little bit, and was walking a fair line between faith, the influence of faith of what I grew up in, but simultaneously having one foot in the world too,
right?
And trying to go that route. And then, of course, I got to a point, like we all do, where we kind of come to this intersection where we're not finding the satisfaction we're looking for in one realm, right. But yet the other realm, I'm kind of like the faith component. It's like what I had grown up in or what my parents had told me. And so I was really in the inside just battling. I remember as a high school kid having to come to church, because that was a rule. You gotta go to church. And so I'm so
not
thankful.
Just on Sundays.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I was Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night, anytime the doors were open. Yep. But I thank God for that my parents instilled that in me, because it was that the word says that faith comes by hearing, and hearing the word of God. So even though I didn't know it, I was being changed and influenced by those environments that would really pay off later. Yeah. So I'm so thankful that my parents put that in my life and made me at those ages. But I remember even like a junior, senior in high school, coming to one of the services, and I would go upstairs. This is when we were in an old church where the kids meet now. And I'd go upstairs in the balcony and sit in the very back pew of the very back row in the back corner and show up late and just kind of sit there like this. But God began to really get a hold of my heart at the end of my senior year, and really calling for more, because faith is not a family heirloom. Right. It's not passed down from generation to generation. Faith has to be personal. Yep. It has to be your decision. Yep. And sometimes those decisions are only made when you have two things. Number one, problems, whether it be external problems or problems on the inside where you feel unsettled on the inside. And the second thing is God uses people to come alongside of you. And I had people in that stage of life, particularly a youth pastor, Mark Schnell, who really was a huge influence in my life, and really believed in me and prayed for me all the time, and he knew the restlessness I was going through on the inside, and kept insisting I come to youth group and bring people to play basketball. And so a lot of my friends came from school, friends I played sports with, that would come. And so, but finally at the end of my senior year, just after graduation, I knew there was a point in my life where I had to get things straight with God. And so I did. I recommitted my life to the Lord. I'll never forget when I did it. It was at youth group when we were meeting in the parsonage. There was a time where we would gather together. It wasn't the parsonage then. They turned it into a youth center. And so at the basement of that youth center is when I said, God, I want to get it right with you, and committed my life to the Lord. And as all of that's going on and I renewed my commitment to him, I was in the process of really trying to figure out what my future would look like as far as what was the next step. Where am I supposed to go to school? What am I going to be doing? Now, athletics was a huge part of my life. So when it came to sports, I knew I wanted to play at the next level playing in college. I loved football. Like football probably was, I had a greater passion for football even more than baseball, but I wasn't big enough to play football in college. I wasn't fast enough to play, but I had a knack for baseball. And so I began to kind of look what would be next to play in college. And so I had prayed about it. God, I want to go to the place where you want me and to the school that's going to give me the most amount of money to play, you know? And so I put a lot of feelers out there, and lo and behold, the one that came back as the one that was going to give me the most money to play as a freshman was a Wesleyan school, Indiana Wesleyan University, which is interesting. It was a Christian university, which is interesting because we're a part, you know, of the Wesleyan denomination. Is Emmanuel Wesleyan Church, is Emmanuel Church, but we're a part of this tribe called the Wesleyans, and that was one of the denomination schools. And it was like, you know, that's interesting. Yeah. But I went and I loved it, and I knew that's where I was supposed to be. And so freshman year, I go and I'm excited because here I am as a freshman, and I went to a public school my whole life, and I get to go to a Christian school, and I'm excited because I'm like, oh my goodness, we get to go to chapel. I was so excited about it, and just so on fire for the Lord. And it was there in my freshman year where I really felt this call, this pull, this voice calling me to ministry. So in my freshman year, in the fall of my freshman year, they had what's called Spiritual Emphasis Week. And really that's like a revival they did for the kids every week, every fall, where you didn't just have chapel 2 or 3 times a week. You also had these nightly services where they would get guest speakers to come in, or one guest speaker to come in for the week, and you would have worship. And it was just an incredible time. And I always look forward to that every year as an Indiana Wesleyan. But my freshman year, there was something different that happened there that year where the Spirit of God began to fall unlike anything I had ever experienced before in my life. That was my freshman year, so I thought maybe this was normal every year. And upperclassmen are like, no, this was not normal. And never experienced it quite like that freshman year. But the Spirit of God would move, and people would just come to the altar and confess sin, and would seek after God. And there would be times where the worship would continue on for hours after it was supposed to be done, and nobody would leave. And I remember it was so powerful and so palpable, the presence of God, that people would leave for a second, go in the lobby, and back then you didn't have cell phones, so you would pick up a phone and they would call their friends in the dorm rooms who couldn't make it that night, and they would say, you need to come now, something's happening. And it was incredible. I mean, worship was happening till 11, 12, 1 o'clock in the morning. It was unbelievable. And it was during that time where I was actually at the fall practice one day, and as I was warming up, it was almost, with the team, it was almost as if it was just me and the Lord in the moment. Like everything else went away, and I did not hear a physical voice. It was not something that was like, you know, I heard God audibly say, but it was this impression inside my soul. And I really felt the Holy Spirit speaking, saying, Mark, baseball is how I got you here, but I've got something greater for you. in the future.
Right.
And that's ministry. And so in that moment, there was a heaviness in that moment, but I continued, to do my thing in the moment. That night we go to Spiritual Emphasis Week, and I'll never forget it. That night, Dr. Jim Garlow spoke, and he spoke a message about the history of the church. And I was captivated by the message. He started in the book of Acts. Now, this is coming from a guy, I believe he's got his doctorate from Drexel University, I believe, in church history. So he's very intelligent and knows the history of the church.
Yeah.
And so he's also a pastor too. And so he spoke, and he started in the book of Acts on the day of Pentecost, with the first day of the church. And then for the next 30 minutes, he went through century by century the history of the church.
Wow.
Its good moments from the days of Pentecost and how it started, to the dark moments where things didn't look so good. And then he went into current movements all the way through century after century. And then he got to Billy Graham and the movement, or the Jesus culture movement, the Jesus movement back in the 70s, and Billy Graham. And then he brought it all the way up and said to current time,
Yeah.
and said, God wants you to be a part of his story. He wants to use you to help write the history of the church. And he's called many of you into full-time ministry.
Yeah.
And tonight's your night to say yes, to receive that call to full-time ministry. And he said, if God is pressing on your heart to do that, I want you to come forward. And I knew I was in tears, as many others were. And I stood up in that auditorium at Indiana Wesleyan University, and I went forward to receive my call to ministry. And I said yes to him that day. And I tell you, it's been quite a journey since then. But when I said yes in that moment to him, I knew that I was supposed to be doing something else besides baseball, because I just sensed it. I knew it. That season was over. And there was something else that was supposed to happen. I wasn't quite sure what that was.
Right.
And God was calling me away from that. And I wrestled with that over the next couple of days. Is this what I'm supposed to be doing? And the only person that I had told was my roommate at the time. And so he was praying for me and with me over that. And a couple of days later, I'm in New Testament survey class. Did I tell you this story? I think I have. Yeah, I was in New Testament survey class, and the professor is speaking, and he's writing on the board. And my roommate was actually in that class with me, and he was seated maybe 4 or 5 people down, and the professor's writing on the board, and he paused, and he sat there for a second. And then he continued teaching. He's writing on the board. Then he stopped and he paused for a second. He did that 2 or 3 times. And finally he stopped and he turned around. He said, look, I just feel like I need to say this. God's impressing it on my heart that somebody in this room feels called to ministry, and you're wrestling with the call of letting go of certain things. And he said, if you would just let go of whatever you're holding tight to, God is going to take you places you have never dreamed before. And they turned right around, kept writing on the board. So I kind of it was a God moment that I'll never forget. Here I am almost 30 years later, and I will never forget that moment. It has marked me for the remainder of my life. And I looked down at my roommates 4 or 5 down. He was like, big eyes. He was going, that's you. Oh my gosh, that's you. So I went to the coach's office and said, I appreciate everything you've done. God's called me to ministry. I'm supposed to be doing something else. I'm not sure what that is, but I know it's to be used of doing something in ministry. And, I don't know why the Lord could have easily kept me in ministry and played baseball. It would have been very easy, but I think it was the faith element of letting go of what was my identity for something else that he had called me to. Yeah. And the coach, was very understanding. And then I called my parents to let them know what was going on. And they were like, what did you say? Yeah. Where did this come from?
Yeah.
And So fast forward about a week later, I'm in chapel, and there is this choir that sings, the Indiana Wesleyan University Chorale. And when they sang, it was like another God moment. All of this is happening about the same time. It was crazy. And it is as if the Lord was saying, this is what you need to do. And it was incredible. Like, it was a time of ministry where the people in the choir were sharing stories and testimonies, and then the songs, and then the beauty of it was just incredible. And I felt like the Lord impression on my heart, this is what you're supposed to be doing. Well, most of my life was spent in athletics. However, there was part of me that loved music. If you're raised in church, music becomes a part of who you are.
Yeah.
It's so impressionable upon your heart because music really moves you. And so even though I never pursued music, I never played an instrument at the time, I never did much singing. It was part of me. I was involved in that. And church, just being in services, it just becomes a part of who you are. And so I sang a little bit in choir in middle school and in high school, but it was never part of something that I always did. And so I remember going to the professor afterwards. After it was all done, I went to his office and I said, hey, I want to be part of that thing that happened in chapel today. He said, the quiet chorale. I said, he said, yeah. And I said, that's what I think I'm supposed to be doing. I want to be part of that. And he said, you do realize that people come from all over to try out for that.
Yeah, it's a big process.
It's a huge process. It's a big deal to be in that. And he's like, "Do you have you ever sang for it?" No, not really.
Got this baseball player showing up asking you.
Yeah. Well, little did I know with him, he actually went to Indiana Wesleyan himself and was on the baseball team and sang in the choir.
Wow.
So the story drew him in. So I sat in he said, come in my office, and he asked where I was from. Well, guess what? My youth pastor, who made a huge impression on me, sang in that chorale at Indiana Wesleyan. So the connection was made. And when I left, he called my youth pastor and said, hey, I've got this kid in my office. Can he sing? I don't know. I love his story. He said, I'm not even sure if he can really sing, but I do know he's got a calling on his life. So I made this chorale and never tried out. People cannot get over that to this moment. Like, I don't know how to read music. They didn't even know if I could sing, but I was put in that chorale, and it was that submersion of ministry that really transformed me. Yeah. And a whole new gift was developed through that process, where this gifting of music and ministry came out of a place that seemed like it wasn't there.
Wasn't even there, yeah.
And it was in that chorale where I learned to sing by ear. I never read music, didn't know it. I just sang by ear. I learned all the music they ever did. There's a lot of kids who could read music. I didn't. I had to listen and learn it from people by ear.
Yeah.
And but it was those moments where, being in that ministry, that chorale, where I was able to go to all these churches, and we went to Europe and sang in Europe, and went to camps and churches and all of these other universities, other schools to sing, and I was able to minister and share my story, and it really began to cut my teeth in ministry. And then out of that, I made a ministry team and began to go with a smaller group of guys traveling to churches and camps and Christian schools. Through the course of a couple of summers, where I was able to hone a skill and really develop ministry, cut my teeth in ministry, and not just from a platform, but with people, and pray with people, and listen to people, and help people.
Right.
And I knew that's what I wanted to do with the rest of my life.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of
the core of your story.
The core of my story. Now, how we got to Emmanuel, I won't get there yet. Maybe I'll share that at a different episode. But that's kind of the call, my testimony and my story to get me to this point.
Very cool. So 2 questions.
Okay.
First one.
I didn't know we were doing questions.
Well,
too.
I'm sorry. Just as you're telling your story, it's making me think. Was there anybody else that received a call into ministry that you know of? at that time?
I don't know.
Don't know. Okay.
I can't remember.
Okay. And then the second question was, did your parents feel through that whole process?
Oh, yeah, they were so supportive, very supportive.
Yeah.
I think it was more like, are you sure this is what God's called you to do? And very happy and very excited. And I've also like tried to put myself in their place as my kids get older. Like my daughter, is 18. Of course, you're my wife. But as she goes off to school, there are a couple of things that I thought through the process as she goes off. Number one, how in the world did my parents let me go all the way out to Indiana?
Yeah.
That's like crazy far. We looked at some schools for our daughter who plays softball, is going to play softball in college. A couple of schools that were pretty far away that we visited, and it was like, I don't know how I can do this.
Yeah.
How in the
just
world
get to you if
I
you
can't
need
just
me.
get to you. So it really took a lot of faith. Now, of course, she didn't want to be that far anyway, and she decided on something much closer. But and maybe my perspective would change if she said, "This is where I want to go." But the faith it took from my parents to say, "We want you to be in a place where God has called you, regardless of the positioning, whether it's close or far."
Yeah.
So the support in that and letting go. Of course, I was the baby.
I was just
I was
thinking
the
that
youngest
too.
out
You
of
were
four.
the
So
baby.
maybe they were like, "Thank
Thank
God
God.
he survived." And
go.
they sent me off that way. I don't know, but to look at that is like, man, that's crazy. That my parents just let me go, and I think that was steps of faith, the support to say, God's got him. It's going to be okay.
Yeah.
And the second thing was just how I look at my kids now, and I'm like, man, if my kids came to me and said, I feel called to ministry, what would I say?
Yeah, that's why I wonder.
What would I say
I was
to them?
wondering why. I mean, how did your parents feel?
The support of that was just not that I wouldn't support my kids going to ministry, because I would.
Just want to,
but I
be
would just
sure.
like, are you sure
Yeah.
you know what you're signing up for?
Right.
So their support through it all has been amazing. I think their godly example they gave me really helped nudge me towards saying yes to that call too,
Yeah.
There are parts of me when I was younger in my adolescent years that said, I want to stay. I'm staying away from it. But then there was parts of me as I got older and I understood what faith was.
Yeah.
And I understood what the journey with God looked like, that it was very much a thing that encouraged my heart and was a great example that if God can take care of my parents, if he can be faithful to them and to see them ministering to people, pouring out to people, helping people, what fulfillment that is to live in the center of God's will and his calling and his purpose. Like that's what I want for my life. And if this is what God's called me to, I'm going to do it.
Yeah.
So they were very supportive every step of the way. Even when they knew like this would probably going to cost them more, or they were going to have to figure some stuff out because I would no longer receive the scholarship money or the grant money that I got for playing baseball. They never said no. That was never even a thought to them. They would do what they'd have to do to figure it out, to make sure I stayed in the place I needed to say yes to God.
Yeah.
So,
which probably at the same time they were seeing the life change in you. And
Yep.
just your
Oh, they were
excitement
tickled.
around it.
Yeah.
Tickled to see that.
Yep.
So that's awesome. Very cool.
So
Yes.
that's a lot.
That's a lot.
And by the way, these podcasts might be a fair bit longer
Than a lot of our podcasts.
than a lot of our podcasts. So
yeah. So you're ready for me to share my story?
let's go.
Okay.